Welcome to the Addition Financial webinar, Planning Early. Our speaker tonight, Mary Kaplan, is sharing her expertise from the Kaplan Firm. Feel free to type your questions in the chat box and we will answer them during our Q&A session towards the end of the presentation. And now I'll hand it over to Mary.
Hello, everyone. Good evening. My name is Mary Kaplan. I'm an attorney here in Florida, licensed in Florida and Georgia. I've been practicing in this area for about 20 years now. Tonight, we're going to talk about the concept that's usually called elder law. An aging in place plan is another kind of way to talk about it. So without further ado, let's get into the presentation. So here's a quote that's relevant to this situation. Planning is bringing the future into the present so you can do something about it now. And that's from a person that's a time management expert, but that applies to so much more than trying to plan your workday. It applies to major issues in life as well. There's a lot of issues that may not be the most pleasant to think about or to admit that you might have someday, but it's always best to plan for the worst and hope for the best. Moving on here. I'm sorry. Okay. So let's talk about things we generally plan for in our lives. We plan vacations. Sometimes years ahead, we'll have a mood board or a OneNote where we've planned out different vacation ideas, destinations. Dinner with friends we'll plan out maybe a week or two in advance. Give a lot of thought to what restaurants we might want to go to, at least in the before times, before COVID. Birthday parties, we plan months in advance, sometimes at least weeks in advance. But how about our future care needs? How many of us have really sat down and thought about that in advance? I would encourage you to do that because, as we'll see, a lot of us are going to need that. Who will need care? And when I say care, I mean some sort of long-term care. So this encompasses anything from assisted living to skilled nursing. And the statistics show that 1 in 2 people, so half of all people, will need some type of long-term care. They're not going to just pass away in their sleep one day. It's going to be a process of, we're going to need some care as we go old. And everybody knows people are living to be older these days than ever before, but that usually carries with it some sort of a need for long-term care. So this seems obvious, but the type, frequency, and percentage of people who need long-term care increases greatly once you're over age 70. And the Department of Health and Human Services estimates 70% of all people, so 70% of all people over the age of 65 will need some type of long-term care. That's a high number, it's a very high number. Okay, so let's talk about Alzheimer's. Alzheimer's increased by 46.1% as a cause of death between 2000 and 2006, while causes of death from other major causes of death that we think of more probably, like prostate cancer, breast cancer, heart disease, and HIV, all declined. So Alzheimer's is increasing at a very, very rapid rate, and that probably has a lot to do with people living longer as well. Every 70 seconds, someone in America develops Alzheimer's. And by mid-century, someone will develop Alzheimer's every 33 seconds. And this is another one that I found surprising. 1 in 8 people over the age of 65 have Alzheimer's. Maybe they're in the early stages, maybe they don't know it or their family doesn't know it yet, but 1 in 8 people actually have it over the age of 65. So when we start talking about things like Alzheimer's and health conditions that are common with older ages, we have to start thinking about the care that those people will likely need, because most of us know as you go further into Alzheimer's, you're not going to be able to care for yourself, at least most likely, towards the middle and end stages of the disease. The national average hourly rate for a home health aide is $21 an hour. I can add up pretty quickly. And some of these numbers are actually outdated. Here it says assisted living is $39,516 a year. That has increased quite a bit since this presentation was first drafted. So here in Central Florida, the average monthly cost of assisted living is $5,000 a month, which is obviously closer to $60,000 a year approximately. And the average cost of skilled nursing is $9,000 a month, which is obviously closer to $100,000 a year. So this is quite expensive for most of us, especially when you think about if you're going to be living in this type of situation for years potentially. So how are we going to pay for that? Well, there's a few options on how to pay for that. You can pay with your own savings. And some people, that's what they think they want to do. They say, okay, I've got a healthy amount of savings. I've saved my whole life. Isn't this part of what I've saved for? And sure, that's an option. You can use and drain your own savings to pay for this type of care. But your family might not like that idea when there are other options available, right? So another option would be long-term care insurance. And I'm going to caveat that with if you can get it, because these days it's very, very difficult. It's a lot more difficult to get now than it was in the past 10, 20 years ago. So if you were, if you planned ahead enough back then and you do have long-term care, obviously that's going to help you a lot. Now, there are limits on what that will cover, of course. So that's not usually the end all be all, but it will help in paying some of the payments towards the care. Or you can implement a legal plan to protect your home and savings, which we'll obviously talk more about, or a combination of all the above. So if you have long-term care, but maybe it's limited in the number of years that it covers or the monthly amount that it covers, you still might need to implement a legal plan to, to protect your savings and have something left to pass on to your family. Or you can pay with some of your own savings and then decide, you know what, I'm going to plan to pay something, but at some point I do need to do something to get myself qualified for maybe some benefits to help defray the cost of this care so that I actually have a legacy I can leave and pass on to my family when I pass away. So here are the things we want to avoid. So obviously, number one on most people's minds is running out of money. Nobody wants to think about running out of money and becoming destitute, especially if you've worked your whole life and you've been a responsible person. You don't want to think that at the end of your life, you're going to be left with no money. You don't want to leave the home unprotected. People are very concerned about this, understandably so. If you've had your home for years and you've been looking forward to the day that sometime you can plan to pass that on to your children or your family, we don't like the idea of some government agency coming in and taking that home, of course. And we don't want to risk the health of family or your spouse. The fact is that caring for a spouse that has Alzheimer's or some other sort of condition where they need a lot of care is very, very stressful on the spouse. And due to the amount of mental and physical toll that it can take on someone, this actually puts the spouse at far greater risk for serious health problems themselves. And it's a lot for one person to do on their own, especially a situation with someone with dementia or Alzheimer's. It's a lot for an elderly spouse to take care of that person all on their own. So let's look at an example here, kind of a hypothetical. So there's a lady named Anne. She's 78 years old. She recently lost her husband after he had a long battle with cancer. Her family wanted to make sure that she would be taken care of, but as is common now, her two children live in different states. They worry about her living alone, but maybe they both have jobs, families of their own to care for, so they can't necessarily drop everything and then move down here to Florida to take care of Anne. So Anne owns a home, okay, and then she has approximately $225,000 in checking, savings, and CDs. So she's got a lot of liquid assets sitting there. She had a long-term care policy that she'd been paying for the last 20 years that provides a daily benefit of $75. So what kind of plan can we come up with for Anne based on this hypothetical situation? So this is her aging in place plan, so to speak. She keeps the long-term care policy. Obviously, that's good to have. She places a portion of her liquid assets, $175,000. Remember, she had a total of $225,000. So she places a portion of that, of $175,000, plus her home into a family trust that her kids would oversee as trustees, and they can get the funds out of it if they need to. And then we take the other $50,000 and put it in a revocable trust that Anne can use for whatever she needs, whether that's home repairs, vacations, anything that she needs right now while she's able, to do things like that. and we create what we call supercharged powers of attorney for health and financial decisions. We'll get into that a little bit more, but those are specific types of durable powers of attorney that at least Florida requires you to have if you want someone to be able to do this type of planning for you on your behalf, if you're in a situation where you don't have the mental capacity to do it yourself. So that's why it's good to have these supercharged powers of attorney. A lot of people have powers of attorney that they've done maybe 5, 10, 15 years ago or more, and they might not have what we call the superpowers. And if you don't have that, then you're very limited on what your adult children or your siblings or whoever it is you named as your agent can do to implement this sort of planning that we're talking about here. And referencing back to the revocable trust, if any of you have listened to my estate planning seminar, we talk a lot about revocable trusts. That is not really a elder law strategy as much as it is just a straight estate planning strategy. We do a lot of revocable trusts. They're very common. It's a good way to avoid probate. So if Anne would pass away, this $50,000 that she's put into this trust would not have to go through probate. So it's basically, but it's not locked away in any way, shape, or form. Anne is able to access that money just like she could her own bank account. So it's not locked up. A family trust is a little bit different, and we'll talk about that maybe a little bit more. Let's look at the next slide here. So the result of this plan is if Anne's health would fail, she has the long-term care policy plus her own money, and her kids can access everything that was put into that family trust that we talked about. After 5 years, which is the look-back period for Medicaid in Florida, all of the assets in the family trust would be protected and they would not be counted as assets for Medicaid purposes. So you all might know that Medicaid limits severely the amount of assets you can use or you can own in trying to qualify for Medicaid. It's right around $2,000 is what you can own. You can't own more than that of assets that are not exempt, and we can talk more about that as well. But this $175,000 that we put into this trust will not be counted after 5 years because we've locked it away into this. It's an irrevocable trust. And after the 5-year look back period, nothing in there is considered to be Anne's assets. It's not considered to be owned by her. If Anne becomes unable to make decisions for herself, then she's got those powers of attorney. She's got the agents that she named to be able to step in and make decisions for her. So if her mental capacity declines and she's not able to understand the documents that we might, the ideas that we might come up with and the documents that we would want her to sign, then we've got these powers of attorney in place. So we've got someone else that can sign documents for her. All right, so let me go back up. I don't want to delve into the VA aspect quite yet. So basically, a family trust is an irrevocable trust as opposed to revocable. So it's an irrevocable trust where you have to name someone else as the trustee. So in this scenario, she put part of her money into this irrevocable family trust, also known as a Medicaid asset protection trust. And it has, there's other people that call it different things, but it's all kind of the same thing. Basically, it's a way to kind of lock away money so that it will not be counted for Medicaid purposes. Now, what we don't want to do is, like we did in this scenario, we don't want to bankrupt Anne or whoever the client would be and take all their money and put it in the family trust. So it's a matter of having that conversation with, okay, how much money do you want to put in the family trust, and how much do you want to keep flexible, available to yourself? And this is all where planning ahead comes into play. Like, let's think about, how much you think you need now and how much you want to lock away. And that way we're planning ahead for the future. But certainly we don't want to bankrupt people, and we want to have you comfortable with the amount that you've got in your own bank account and your own revocable trust that you have access to. But this is a good way to plan ahead, knowing there's a 5-year look back for Medicaid. If you don't do anything and you wait until the last minute when you're about, like someone like Anne is about to go into a nursing home, if she ever has to do that, then you're kind of stuck with, that we're not going to be able to protect all of your money. You're going to lose a lot of it if you don't plan ahead, because Medicaid's going to take that. They're going to penalize you because you waited too long, and they look back 5 years at all the transfers that you've done to either other people or to trust or whatever it may be. All right, so let's move on. What if Anne's husband was a veteran? So if Anne was a spouse of a wartime veteran, she could be eligible for a cash payment of up to $1,094. Her health would determine how much she would be eligible for. And the same type of planning as shown in the earlier slide would need to be done to reduce her income and assets to an acceptable level. So without getting too far into the details, because it is very detailed, VA also has a different set of rules from Medicaid, but there is also a limit on what they call your net worth. The number, let's see if I can pull up the exact number. It's right around 130,000. So it's higher than Medicaid, of course, but that includes income as well. So Medicaid has income and asset limits that are different numbers from each other, and VA has one number and they call it net worth, and it's like your income plus your assets minus assets that are exempt. But basically, it's the same idea roughly as what you would kind of do for Medicaid. You can do you can call it a Veterans Asset Protection Trust. It's very similar to the Medicaid Asset Protection Trust. So similar ideas in planning and kind of locking away some of the money, and then keeping, of course, some of the money available for the client to use and do with what they wish, especially if we're planning far enough ahead where we've got some room to play with it. And if Anne was a veteran herself and she had served during a period of war, she could be eligible for up to $1,700 approximately. Similar planning would be done to get her income and assets to an appropriate level, her net worth, they call it. And her health would determine how much she was eligible for on a monthly basis. Okay, so let's talk about what if she had done nothing. So if she had done nothing, her home and all of her liquid assets could be consumed by long-term care costs because, if you want to pay out of pocket, like we kind of mentioned, you can do that, but you're easily going to eat through everything that you have in savings, especially if you don't do any planning at all, and you don't come and see me. You can easily, because the cost of care is so high, you can just spend everything and burn it through everything. And if she did not have a proper durable power of attorney, thousands could be spent on setting up a guardianship for her. This is something that we touched on earlier presentations as well, talking about guardianship. Guardianship is really a thing that you want to avoid because it's a court case, first of all, and it's a type of court case where you are required to be represented by counsel. So then, of course, you have to pay these attorney fees and you have to pay filing fees to the court in order to open the case. And so again, we come back to the concept of a supercharged durable power of attorney. It's that specific type of power of attorney that includes specific provisions authorizing your agent to make these sorts of planning decisions for you. And the state of Florida requires that you specifically authorize those type of decisions to get made on your behalf. You can't just have a general document that says, oh, this person can do anything related to finances for me, sign my name and notarize it. No. You have to have the specific language included in order to authorize your children or whoever it is to make these sorts of planning decisions for you if you're not able to understand and you don't have the mental capacity to sign a document. Otherwise, your family would have to get guardianship of your property. So again, talking about guardianship, there's guardianship of person and then there's guardianship of property. A lot of times they're both in one. It's guardianship of person and property, which involves having to set up the court case and having to do annual accountings to the court. You have to account for every single dollar that's in that guardianship account. And that will enable your children, someone in your family, I'm assuming children here, to make these type of decisions for you, but it involves a lot of costs and a lot of hassle and going through the court system. And there also would be no funds if she did nothing. There would also be no funds that her children could access to make sure she's getting the best care possible. So there's no extras. I mean, whereas with the family trust, the children can get into that and use the money for whatever extra things are needed. That wouldn't be possible. And nothing would pass to them upon her death because she probably has spent through all the savings that she had. Further, if she'd done nothing, if she was a veteran, she would have left thousands of dollars untapped because it would have been available. She just didn't use it. her choices of care would be severely limited. Nursing home care might be the only choice. So let's get back to kind of the beginning. What are our goals? So all of us could probably agree with these. Our goals are to age with dignity, to have access to the best care possible, to control who will manage your finances if you're not able to. That's a big one. I know probably lots of us have people in our family that we might not trust with our money and other ones that we might. The only way to make sure that the correct person is going to be making these decisions is to set up these documents ahead of time and name that person to be maybe your agent under the durable power of attorney and or the trustee of your family trust if you decide to do a family trust. Otherwise, you're going to be stuck with whoever the court nominates as your guardian. That might not be the person that you wanted. And to leave the legacy you choose, not what the state chooses for you. So we've probably all heard the horror stories about Medicaid coming in after someone passes away and basically taking all the money that was left, if anything was left. And they will do that. Medicaid can put a claim in your probate estate if you pass away with any money left, and they can take it as money that was owed to them for your care. In addition to that, they'll take a whole lot of it up front as well before you're placed in a nursing home. So, you do want to make a plan to avoid that situation, and we can help people avoid it. It's really kind of amazing what we can do if you plan ahead, because if we have time to come up with a plan, then it won't be as stressful because you'll be able to understand, first of all, what's going on and to work with us to figure out what the numbers will be and what you want to do. You get comfortable with it, and then we'll be able to maximize the amount of savings that we can do so that you'll have something to pass down to your family. So the next step, if you or your loved one would like to explore how an aging in place plan would work for you, just call us. This is our number. We'd love to speak with you. Just like with estate planning, I do all my initial consults for free. So we do 1-hour consults. I'll talk to you, I'll give you all an idea of what I would recommend. And if you want to go forward, then there would be a fee. But if you don't want to go forward, we don't charge you anything. So just give us a call. All of our initial meetings these days are done on Zoom because of COVID, of course. Some people don't like that, and I understand it's nicer to be able to meet everybody in person, but unfortunately, just with the reality of today's world, we do them all over Zoom. I'd rather do that than on the phone, so at least I can see you. And then if you do decide to go forward, we do have to have you come in to sign, and we can work out whatever needs to get worked out with that. But some of these documents cannot be remotely witnessed or notarized. So oftentimes we do have, most of the time, we have to have you come in to sign, and we'll meet you then. All right. Thank you for all the questions. I love getting lots of questions. It means you guys are paying attention and interested. So the first question is, can the money put in a trust be invested in mutual funds, etc.? The answer is yes. By all means, it can certainly, and we encourage, obviously, the trustees to invest it in something that's going to generate some kind of interest. So absolutely yes. And we also have financial advisors that we can recommend to the trustee that we know are good as well. And we're happy to bring them in. If you already have a financial advisor, we can bring them in and make them part of the process as well. Second question, at what age do you recommend we begin this planning? That's a really good question. Of course, there is no real set age that I would say for sure, because everyone's different with their health situation, of course, and their life and their savings. But I would say as early as you feel comfortable talking to me about it, maybe 65. That's not too early, because really, if we do decide to recommend a family trust like we talked about, and of course that's not something we do recommend in every scenario, and there are many other things we can do, by the way. I just touched on the family trust because that's a popular one, but there are lots of other strategies that we can recommend depending on the nature of your assets and the value of those assets. But for people who do like the trust and for whom I would recommend that, you can actually set up a trust, a family trust, and put nothing in it right away. And then you can plan, okay, next year I'm going to put X amount in it. And we do have software where we can calculate, of course, based on your personal asset array and what you own, we can calculate how much we would recommend putting in it. And we would ask, we get lots of detailed information from you so that we can customize each plan. One of the pieces of information that we ask for and that we do always get because we need to is your income and expenses that you currently have. That we can work off of that to come up with maybe a number that you're comfortable with putting in the trust and then reserving the rest of it in your own revocable trust, which again is different from the family trust. The amount in the revocable trust would be money that you'd have full access to and use it and spend it however you want. It's kind of like, you know, the money you have now. But that's all kind of based on your own income and expenses and projected expenses, and of course your age. And if you're on the younger end of the spectrum, you're going to want to keep more money in your personal revocable trust and put less into the family trust. But it's always good to have it in place for when you do need it, and it can be coupled with other strategies too, so that that's not the only thing we're doing. So then we can maybe put less in it, knowing we're going to implement another strategy as well. But again, this is all kind of very case specific, what I would recommend. Yeah, there was another similar question. This person said, I have most of my assets, homes, 401k, and bank accounts in a revocable trust. What percentage should be designated to the irrevocable trust? Is this number based on guidelines for the Medicaid look back time? So it's great that you have a revocable trust. You've already done some planning to avoid probate, and that's great. Again, I can't tell you without knowing the specifics of your situation, what percentage of your assets that I would recommend putting into the irrevocable trust. But it would be based on your age, your health, what you own, and what your income and expenses are. And then we can run a couple different scenarios for you and come up with some numbers that we would propose for the amount to put into the family trust. And you don't have to go with what we've recommended. You can do less or more depending on your comfort level. But anything that we can put in there is a good start towards locking it away and making sure Medicaid can't get to it. What if you have no capable children? Is it safe to have your lawyer as the superpower of attorney? Should you give your lawyer a list of things you want to be sure happens when you're in a home, like getting your hair done, church contributions, etc.? I usually try to shy away from having people name me as their agent under power of attorney just because it's a conflict of interest, or it can be. I have done this before in very few limited cases where the person really didn't have anybody else that they could name and weren't comfortable with anyone else. So we can always talk about that. And yeah, absolutely, give me a list of things that you want to make sure happens while you're in a home, and I can communicate that to whoever is named, particularly if you set up a family trust and have a trustee. That's the person who would dip into some of this money and use it for extras. So absolutely, it's always great to communicate what you want for everything in the future, including, of course, funeral plans and all that. We talk about all that too, and when we do estate planning. And I always encourage people to talk to their children and let them know what they want, because there might come a point where you're not able to communicate and let them know. So it's always good to talk about these things ahead of time. That's all the questions that we have time for. We did have a few that I couldn't answer, and I'm sorry for that. If anyone would like, of course, to call me, call my office and set up a consult, of course, you can ask questions then, and we can also delve into a little bit about what I would recommend for you personally. So I thank you all for listening. I hope you have a great evening.
Thank you so much, Mary. This concludes our presentation tonight. Check your inboxes for an email containing a link to tonight's recording, and thank you all again for joining us.